On June 9, 2024, at precisely midnight Riyadh time, a 50-year-old agreement between the United States and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia quietly expired. There was no press conference, no presidential address, no emergency session of Congress. Just silence. The mainstream financial media told you this was a non-event. They said the petrodollar was already dying a slow death and that markets had priced it in. But here's what they didn't tell you. In the 6 months following that expiration, Saudi Arabia began accepting Chinese Yuan for oil shipments to Beijing. They joined the BRICS Plus coalition, and they started stockpiling physical gold at a pace not seen since the 1970s. The news is telling you inflation is cooling and that the Fed has everything under control. But the physical data, the actual movement of ships, vaults, and sovereign wealth, is screaming something else entirely. Here's why this matters to you. For 50 years, every nation on Earth that wanted to buy oil had to first acquire US dollars. This created a forced demand for our currency, approximately 80 trillion in circulation outside American borders. That's not money sitting in foreign bank accounts because they like us. That's money held hostage by a system that just lost its enforcement mechanism. And when hostages are released, they come home. This is the story of the greatest monetary divorce in human history. And like all divorces, someone is about to lose the house. Let's start with the evidence that this isn't clickbait. Right now, you can look at your screen and see the dollar index hovering around 104. The talking heads will tell you the dollar is strong. But here's what the physical data reveals. In 2022, central banks around the world purchased 1,136 metric tons of gold, the highest annual total since 1967. In 2023, they bought another 1,037 tons. And in 2024, the pace accelerated. Notice something interesting about who's buying. The buyers aren't Canada, Japan, or Germany, our traditional allies who depend on dollar-denominated trade. The buyers are China, Russia, India, Turkey, and Poland. These are nations actively building parallel systems. They're not buying gold because they think the dollar will strengthen. They're buying gold because they know something is breaking. Let me show you something the financial news completely ignored. In March 2023, China and Brazil announced they would conduct bilateral trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. That's a $150 billion annual trade relationship gone from dollar settlement. 1 month later, France's TotalEnergies completed its first LNG transaction with China's Chinese Yuan. France, a NATO ally, one of America's oldest partners, selling energy to China in Chinese currency. Then came India and Russia settling oil trades in rupees. Then Malaysia proposing an Asian monetary fund to reduce dollar dependence. Then Argentina, drowning in dollar-denominated IMF debt, joining BRICS and beginning to explore UN-based trade. In 2000, approximately 70% of global trade was settled in US dollars. Today, that number has fallen below 59%. The mainstream calls this a gradual transition. I call it a bank run in slow motion. Now let me show you what the Fed itself is worried about. In October 2023, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York published a working paper titled The International Role of the US Dollar. Buried on page 14, you'll find this passage. A significant decline in global demand for dollar-denominated assets could lead to upward pressure on U.S. interest rates and downward pressure on the dollar's value, potentially creating inflationary feedback loops. Let me translate that from Fed speak to English. If the world stops needing dollars, those dollars come back to the United States. When $80 trillion in currency suddenly competes for American goods and assets, you don't get cooling inflation. You get a currency crisis. We've printed the money, we've exported the inflation, but we've kept the IOU. And when those IOUs come due all at once, well, you remember 2020. That was a supply shock. What's coming is a monetary shock. And history tells us those are far, far worse. To understand why the petrodollar's death matters, we have to understand why it was born. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon did something unprecedented. He closed the gold window. For 27 years, the US dollar had been backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Any foreign government could exchange their dollars for physical gold from Fort Knox. It was the foundation of the Bretton Woods system, the monetary architecture that rebuilt the post-war world. But there was a problem. We were printing more dollars than we had gold to back them. France, under Charles, but because they wanted to keep the lights on. Now this system had a fatal flaw, and a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin saw it coming in 1960. Triffin posed a simple question. If the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, other countries need dollars to conduct trade. How do they get those dollars? Simple. America runs trade deficits. We import more than we export. We send dollars out into the world. But here's the paradox. A country that runs perpetual deficits eventually undermines confidence in its own currency. The more dollars we export, the less valuable each dollar becomes. Triffin predicted that any reserve currency system would eventually destroy itself. The country providing the reserve must choose between its domestic economic health and its international monetary obligations. For 50 years, the petrodollar delayed this reckoning. Forced demand papered over the cracks. But now the forced demand is ending. Let me show you the players on this board. China is the world's largest importer of oil. They buy more Saudi crude than anyone else. And they've been quietly preparing for this moment for 2 decades. Official Chinese gold reserves have increased from 395 tons in 2000 to over 2,200 tons today. Analysts estimate their actual holdings, including undisclosed state purchases, could be 3 times higher. They've launched the Shanghai Gold Exchange. They've created the digital yuan. They've built the SIP system, China's alternative to SWIFT. China isn't just preparing for a post-dollar world, they're building it. Russia controls some of the largest energy reserves on the planet. After 2022, they were cut off from the dollar system through sanctions. And what happened? They didn't collapse. They pivoted. Russian-Chinese trade exploded to record highs, settled in yuan and rubles. India became Russia's largest oil customer, paying in rupees. The sanctions designed to destroy Russia instead provided a proof of concept. The world watched a major economy survive, even thrive, outside the dollar system. And Saudi Arabia? They're playing both sides. MBS has met with Xi Jinping. He's entertained BRICS membership. He's diversified Saudi investments away from US treasuries. But he's also maintained military ties with Washington, for now. The Saudis understand something fundamental. In a multipolar world, you don't commit to one side, you become the pivot. And whichever way they pivot next will determine whether the petrodollar dies quickly or slowly. There's one more piece to this puzzle. For decades, foreign nations recycled their oil dollars into US Treasury bonds. This kept interest rates low and allowed America to finance its deficits cheaply. But China has reduced its treasury holdings by over $500 billion since 2013. Japan, our largest foreign creditor, has been selling. So who's buying all this new debt? The Federal Reserve American banks. Pension funds, we're buying our own IOUs. And when the world stops needing dollars for oil, the last remaining buyer of US debt is us. That's not a monetary system. That's a closed loop. And closed loops don't end well. So when does this system actually break? Let me give you the event horizon. We're currently in the fracture phase, spanning 2024 to 2025. Saudi Arabia is negotiating oil contracts in yuan. BRICS Plus is expanding. De-dollarization is accelerating. But the dollar hasn't collapsed. Why? Because inertia is powerful. 80% of global trade is still invoiced in dollars, even if settlement is happening elsewhere. The financial plumbing of the world still runs through New York. But that plumbing is being rerouted. By 2028, analysts project that the BRICS Plus coalition will have a functional alternative payment system serving over 45% of global GDP. That means almost half the world's economy will have the option to bypass the dollar. Not all of them will, at first, but the option itself is what matters. Because once there's a credible alternative, dollar holders will ask a dangerous question. Why am I holding a depreciating asset when I don't have to? History shows us that reserve currency transitions aren't gradual. They appear gradual until they're not. The British pound was the world's reserve currency for over 100 years. Its decline started after World War I, but the actual collapse happened in just a few years, between 1944 and 1947. One day the world trusted the pound. The next they demanded dollars. The same thing will happen to the dollar. Maybe not in 2025, maybe not in 2028. But within the next decade, we will witness a cascade event. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like. Imagine it's 2029. China announces it will no longer accept dollars for manufactured goods. They want yuan, gold-backed digital currency, or commodities. At first, American importers scramble. They convert their dollars to yuan on the forex markets. This crashes the dollar by 15% in a week. Foreign dollar holders see this and panic. They start selling, not because they want to, but because they have to. A country holding $500 billion in dollar reserves just watched $75 billion evaporate. They sell to stop the bleeding. But their selling accelerates the crash. This is the inflationary feedback loop the Fed warned about. The cascade becomes a waterfall. Back home, those returning dollars flood into the American economy. Too much money chasing too few goods. Inflation doesn't tick up, it explodes. Your savings lose 30% of their purchasing power in a year, then 40%. The Fed can't raise rates fast enough without crashing the treasury market. They're trapped. raise rates, and the government can't service its $35 trillion debt. Keep rates low and inflation runs wild. This isn't a doomsday prediction. It's not about societal collapse. It's about a fundamental restructuring of global power. In the new normal, commodities matter more than paper. Gold isn't just a hedge, it's money. Oil isn't just energy, it's leverage. Food isn't just sustenance, it's sovereignty. The nations that control physical resources will set the terms. The nations that printed paper will negotiate from weakness. For 80 years, America's greatest export was the dollar. We traded paper for goods. We exchanged promises for production. That trade is ending. And when it ends, we will have to produce again, manufacture again, build again. That's not necessarily bad. In fact, long-term, it might be healthy. But the transition is going to be painful. Are you prepared? Let me give you the core thesis in one sentence. The petrodollar created artificial demand for American currency. That demand is collapsing. And when it's gone, $80 trillion must find a new home, or destroy its value trying. This isn't speculation. It's arithmetic. The only questions are timing and severity. So what do? First, understand that physical assets will outperform paper claims. Gold, silver, productive land, essential commodities. These have survived every currency collapse in history. Second, reduce your exposure to dollar-denominated debt. In a high-inflation environment, being a debtor can actually help, but only if your income keeps pace. For most people, debt becomes a trap. Third, diversify geographically. This doesn't mean moving to another country. It means understanding that the global financial system is fragmenting, and having exposure to multiple monetary zones reduces your risk. Fourth, and most importantly, pay attention to the boring news. The petrodollar didn't die in a dramatic announcement. It expired quietly. The next major shifts will happen the same way. By the time CNN covers this, it'll be too late to prepare. Here's my question for you. Do you think the petrodollar's decline is being managed by central banks in coordination, or are we watching a genuine loss of control? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and the best insights often come from this community. If you want to stay ahead of the boring moves that reshape the global financial system, the treaties that expire at midnight, the currency swaps that no one reports, the vault transfers that telegraph the future, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because by the time these stories become mainstream, the moves have already been made. Next week, I'm releasing a deep dive into what China is actually doing with its gold reserves, and why their official numbers might be hiding the largest strategic stockpile in human history. If the petrodollar is dying, what's replacing it? The answer is in the vaults. Until then, stay boring, stay prepared.